Greetings. The purpose of this screencast is to give you a quick tour of the basics of Google Sheets. We can get to Google Sheets in a few different ways. We can come over to our waffle, access our Google Suite apps and land on it right here, or we can come to our New button and land on Sheets and open a new Google Sheet. Google Sheets are very similar to Microsoft Excel or Apple Numbers. Let's follow the best practices and make sure that we rename our spreadsheet right at the beginning. Let's take a quick visual tour of what we see in front of us. A sheet is a collection of cells that are named by their row and column coordinates. So we see our column titles are the letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, etc. And our row names are named numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So if I'm right here, I'm in cell A1 or B2, C3, etc. Going across the top, we have a drop-down menu bar that's very similar to the other Google Suite apps. We have the File menu, Edit, View, Insert, Format, and one that's a little bit different is the Data drop-down menu. We'll explore this a little bit further. We have Tools, Add-ons, and our place to get help from the land of Google. Moving over here, we can see that we have our familiar access to version history, comments, and the share button. Now, Google Sheets can be used for so many different purposes in school, business, and in personal life. I'm going to focus on using Google Sheets for school uses. And many teachers use a Google Sheet to track student points, either like a grade book or participation points or a behavior record. I'm going to start out by using this to create a student tracker. And I'm going to click right here and add the names of my students. So these are my student names. My first row, starting here in B1, I'm going to use that to indicate days of the week. And I could type day 1, day 2, etc. But we also have what's called a smart autofill. So if I type day 1 and then I grab that corner and start dragging it across, it will actually fill in logically and consecutively. I'm going to use row 2 to indicate the total number of points for any given assignment. So I'm going to have a 5, a 10, I'll do a 50, 100-point assignment, and then I'll come back to a 5-point assignment. I'm just going to delete day 6. So that's my total points, and maybe I'll want to label that over here. Now I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to add in numerical values next to each student names as their imaginary scores. So I now have a list of students, days of the week, and I have some assignments or some point logs, and I've filled in their scores. I do want to pause and show that we can format all of the numbers and words in here. So I can click on any cell and I can hit bold. I can click on a group and highlight a group of cells and do something like italicize them. And right now I'm defaulting to sort of regular number format, but I'm just going to click on one of the cells and I'm going to click on format number, and we can see that we can actually have things like currency and decimal points and percentages. I can format something to register a date and time input. So we default to what we call standard number format, which looks like this. I also want to point out that we can sort. And so right now my students are not really in alphabetical order. So I'm going to highlight my student names and the scores that go with them because I want to make sure Bruce doesn't somehow get Sally's points. So I want to change this to be alphabetically ordered by the student name. So I'm going to come over here and I can sort this range because I'm not sorting everything. And I can sort it based on what's in column A. And we're going to watch how Alex popped to the top and Teddy went to the bottom, and they kept their scores with them. That's because I only highlighted the names and the scores, not the title rows as well. Now that we've established our students and their coordinating points, maybe we want to do something like total up those points. So I can come down here and I want to label this as my total points for the week. And I don't need to say 5 plus 10 plus 50. I can have Google do the math for me. and I can come to the insert, and it's going to be called a function. And in this case, it's one of my more frequently used functions because there's a whole lot of them. It's the sum function. And now it's asking me what numbers, what cells should I sum? And I just need to highlight these 5 cells. So I want to add them up. That's cells B2 through F2, and I'll hit the return or enter button. That's the total number of possible points for the week. And I could do that same process, insert, function, sum, highlighting those cells for my student Alex, and hitting the enter button again. I can also simply copy this function by hitting Control C or the copy, and I can paste it into all these other cells, and the formula or the function will get copied. And I can select this whole row and I can bold it, and I can even use my bucket to maybe fill that row to draw my attention to it. Google can do some more math for me. Maybe I want to know the average score for any given assignment or activity. So I'm going to come underneath and I'm going to click on this cell, and I'm going to use my function shortcut key, which is all the way over here. It's got that familiar sum sign. And I'm going to say I want the average. And this time I'm going to highlight the cells above because I want to average these scores, and then I'll hit the enter button. So the average score was 2.8. And similarly, I can copy that and I can paste it all the way across and get my averages if that's something I'm interested in. So it's awesome that Google will do a lot of my math for me through their functions. But sometimes I want to just write a formula by myself. So for example, I have Alex here with 111 out of 170 points, and I want to find out his overall percentage. So I'm going to put in equal, and I'm going to use the cell reference. So I've got G3, and I'm going to divide it by G2, and it's going to be 0.65. That's going to be my decimal. And that's wonderful. And I can copy this formula, but I want you to see what happens. It's going to copy, and I'm going to hit the paste. And do you see how it actually changed? So now it's this cell divided by the one above it, because that was what my direction was. Take this cell and divide it by the cell right above. But what I really want, that's a mistake. What I really want is I want every cell to always be divided by G2. So the way that I set G2 as sort of a stationary static number is I'm going to put the $sign, and that says always go back to G, always go back to 2. So when I do that and I hit copy, paste, I get G4 divided by G2, G5 divided by G2. So it always goes back to my consistent total points. The next thing I'm going to show is how to change those from decimals to percentages. I'm going to highlight the whole row, and I'm going to come back here to Format, Number, and I'm going to click on Percent. And that'll give me the percent with just 2 decimal points. The next thing I want to point out is that once we've sort of set up some of this math and these sums, and I maybe want to change what's going on with my students, and so maybe Sally's not going to be in class anymore. So I'm going to click on the 6, and that will highlight the whole row, and I can either right click or I can come up and say edit, and I can delete row 6 entirely, and my functions and my formulas are smart and they account for Sally being out of class. I can also at any point go ahead and take a column, and I can insert a column to the left or to the right, and everything will adjust for that movement as well. We showed how we can highlight a whole column, and we can color code it by filling it in with a certain color. We can also select individual cells, and we can fill those in with individual colors. In addition to manually coloring every cell by clicking on it or clicking on the row, I can do something called conditional formatting. And this is a slightly more advanced feature, but you can click on that and it'll open up a window over here and you can tell it to color cells that contain certain words or that have numbers greater than or less than something, and then you can pick what color. So if you had students who earned, perfect tens, maybe they would be colored in purple. So that's something called conditional formatting. So we showed off a lot of the basics for Google Sheets on this so far, and this works as a great 1 week accounting for a group of students, but what about next week? Well, I could certainly add in more columns that would create a very big spreadsheet, or what I can do is I can come down to the bottom. We haven't looked down here yet, and I'm on sheet number 1. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is maybe rename that sheet, and I'm going to go ahead and call it week 1. Now I'm going to use this plus button, add sheet. As soon as I click on that plus button, I'll automatically get sheet 2 right next to it. And I'm going to go ahead and rename it right away and call it week 2. So we can keep adding sheets, and maybe they correspond to the different weeks in our school year or maybe our different classes. I'm going to go ahead and set this page up similarly to my other page. So I've added my titles for days of the week. I'm adding in my student names, but this time instead of numbers, I can actually put in words, and I can do something like great or absent, and that's fine. Now I can't sum those up like I would if they were numbers, but I can actually have a function over here that's called the count or the count if, and it could do something like count how many times the word absent appeared. I can also, when I come to a cell, I can insert images into a cell or over cells. I can add drawings. And one of the most popular things is to insert a checkbox. So now I can check off things on my Google Sheet. Another popular thing to do on a Google Sheet is something called data validation. And that's when you get a drop-down menu of choices to select. So I'm going to just use this as an example. I've highlighted a cell, and I'm going to go to Data, and there's a lot of information and choices here. I'm going to land on Data Validation, and the list that I'm going to choose from is going to be a list of items. And so maybe my words are going to be yes, no, and maybe. And I'm going to hit the Save button. And now when I click on this cell, or when someone else clicks on this cell, I get the drop-down menu. And just like I could copy functions, I can copy formatting as well. So our data menu has quite a few options on it as well. We can do things like filters and pivot tables, and those will be videos for a later date. Moving over to tools, from a Google Sheet, we can create a Google form. And so in order to understand that connection, we should first understand what a Google form is. I'm going to just click on it, and you'll see that right away we get a Google form named after my sheet, and they are going to be connected. So make sure you watch our video on Google Forms. Let's go back to the sheet. We just got a few more things to talk about. So a lot of people like to record notes in a Google spreadsheet, but that can sometimes get lengthy. So just like we can use one of these cells to record a single word or a short phrase, we can add much longer notes to a Google Sheet. Maybe we've got some student observations or some anecdotal information to record. The problem is sometimes that gets kind of long. So let's say I want to record this big sentence about Alex. We see how because it's long, it actually starts taking over the other cells. Now, if I had something in the cell right next to it, let's just put the number 12, this gets cut off. It's still there when we click on the cell. We can see it up here, but it's not visible right away. So we can talk about how to format that cell a little bit more. And that would be when we talk about text wrapping and overflow. So right now we're in overflow, meaning it can flow over into the next cell if it's empty. But we can also do text wrapping. Oh, look at that. So that's when you see sort of like a little paragraph in one of our Google cells, is that we've set it to text wrap through that format option. We can also set it to text clip, and that means even if the cell next to it is empty, it doesn't overflow into it. Again, it's still there, but we just have to click on it to see everything. The last thing I'll point out is format text rotation. It's going to look a little funny in this cell, but we can tilt the words up. That might be better if it's something like as one of these cells up here. We can also tilt them down. I'll undo that. So we can have some fun with our text and how we stack it, how we rotate it. It doesn't always have to be in a straight horizontal